Welcome everyone to the Public Health Improvement webinar, From Performance Management Resistance to Measuring a QA Culture, with public health practitioners Jennifer Gray and Dan Ward. This is Liliana Johnson with the National Network of Public Health Institutes, or NNPHI. We're first going to hear from Jennifer Gray. She is a Performance Improvement Manager with the Wyoming Department of Health. Among her responsibilities, Jennifer is focused on readying the agency for accreditation and implementing a performance management system. Jennifer earned her PhD in psychology and human behavior and has an extensive research background. And next we'll hear from Dan Ward, who is the Performance Improvement Manager for the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare Division of Public Health. Dan has great experience in quality improvement, including in developing a quality improvement program and leading QI projects in various settings. Dan has earned his master's degree in public health administration and has a paralegal certification as well. And with that, Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to thank Lil for the great introduction. I have been the Performance Improvement Manager for the Wyoming Department of Health Public Health Division for about a year now. And prior to that, I was with a fellowship at the Department of Health where I got to experience different levels and the director's vision for performance management within the whole department, not just within the division. So today I'm going to talk to you about embracing performance management and how at the Wyoming Department of Health and the Public Health Division we've seen a shift from people resisting this idea of performance management and using data to drive our decision making to seeing people start to embrace that. And just as a quick overview, I'm going to cover our own internal performance management process just to give you a little bit of background, the concept of change, and then Wyoming's process and where we're headed in the future. And if you have questions, please feel free to type them in or interrupt as we go along. So Wyoming's performance management system was modeled after the performance stat movement. And for those of you who are not aware of what this entails, I've given you the slide that you can feel free to read through. But basically, this was a mandate that the department received from the director of the Department of Health. And he gave the divisions guidelines for reporting and for what he would like to be reported on. But he really left the implementation of data collection and measurement selection to the divisions. And so what we're currently doing as a system is that the director's office has created documents for reporting to the performance improvement team. And they call themselves the PIT team, just to demonstrate that they have a sense of humor about themselves. And the reports that are produced annually to hand to the director so that he can share those with the governor and the legislators. And we have snapshots and program performance reports. The snapshots give an overview of the program and the budgets and who works with the program, and the performance report is really focusing in on the data tied to the program's mission, the outcomes, and efficiencies. And at our performance improvement team meetings, those consist of the director, the deputy director, the CFO, the division senior administration, and program managers are expected to report on their program's data and progress to this group annually. You'll see that we listed it as having bi-monthly improvement meetings, and this occurs because we have so many programs within the department that need to report back to the PIT team. Within the division, we hold quarterly meetings to review the progress, the data, and the action plans of each team to make sure that what the teams are doing are actually impacting their outcomes. And if it's not impacting their outcomes, it provides a space to talk about how they're going to shift their performance management. So in mid-March, Jack Moran from the Public Health Foundation came and gave a quality improvement train the trainer training for our department. And what he did during this time was he talked about what are important to have in place to have a cultural change. And without knowing this, we seem to have haphazardly stumbled on the same ideas that Jack has so nicely outlined. So I decided that instead of reinventing the wheel and telling you, giving you new labels for it, we would use Jack's model, and then I would explain how each of our steps fit under Jack's model. So the 4 ingredients for successful change is start by building a case for change, develop a consistent message, don't underestimate the amount of effort this will take, and really this is where you have to kind of dig in and just have grit and patience and determination and belief that the process will work once people see the value in it. And then it's very helpful if you can view each opportunity as a way to engage others in this change. And I'll talk more about this as we progress. So the first step is building the case for change. And Wyoming was in a very beneficial position, at least in terms of building the case, because we had leadership's buy-in. In fact, we had a mandate from leadership. And so this came down directly from the director during an all-hands meeting of all staff. And so they got to hear from him how he was placing a prioritization on using data to make driven decisions and to hold ourselves accountable. And additionally, he is present in all of the PIT meetings that I discussed. And so he's really going to be the enforcer for us. And this has helped us a good bit because the director is holding each senior official accountable for their program's performance. So it's not just me going in saying, hey guys, this would be a great idea if we do this. I also have the backing of leadership. And then most importantly, which I completely left off this slide, it's really important when you're building the case for change to talk to the staff directly about how it will benefit them and how it's going to benefit the public in the long run. Because ultimately we are public service oriented, and so appealing to their notion that we can make ourselves better and we can serve people better often helps build the case for change. Additionally, it helps to have a clear and consistent message so that leadership and middle management and even the research fellows are giving the same consistent message about the changes you're trying to make. So in Wyoming, we said we want to have data-driven work and decision-making, and specifically, we want to know how our activities are making a difference. So are all the widgets that we're counting actually impacting something in the community? And then we also, one of our other consistent messaging is that we need to have accountability, that as the financial system is tightened and we're experiencing budgetary crises, we need to show the legislators and the public that we are making a difference and spending taxpayer money wisely. And so by using performance management, we're able to hold the agency and the programs accountable for results. And while this has been our message, sometimes you're going to run into resistors who you just can't change their mind. And so for us, when that failed, we just went with this is leadership's expectation. So maybe you don't agree with data-driven decision-making. Please don't tell me that. But maybe you don't. And we always got to fall back on that leadership expectation. It's been very helpful for us because leadership is willing to play the bad guy in essence, this allowing middle management to empathize but enforce the process. So by leadership saying this is what we're going to do and you must do it, middle management now has the ability to say, you know, I agree with you. Things could have been implemented differently. Things could have been rolled out differently. There are different ways to conceptualize this, but this is what we've been giving, and now we must work within these constraints. And ultimately, our goal, at least in the public health division, and I believe from the director's office as well, was that we wanted staff to understand that this was not an addition to their job, but rather it was a new process to add demonstrable value to their jobs. So we weren't asking them to do one extra thing, but instead we were asking them to just reformat the process so they could demonstrate the work, the effectiveness of the work that they were doing. The amount of effort that affecting change takes is tremendous. Even with leadership's buy-in and leadership support, we found that there were lots of different stumbling blocks that could catch people up. And so one of the first great things that happened was that the director's office provided assistance and offered training in the basic expectations of performance management. And so the director's office did a great job of sharing why it's important to manage the performance. However, after they did this, the training and the coaching predominantly fell back to the divisions. The director's office was still a great assistance in the liaisons, being able to reach out and get assistance. However, in the public health division, we have done things slightly differently than in some of the agency's other divisions. And so for us, we realized that there was differing levels of readiness for all of our program managers. So some program managers were epidemiologists by training. They had their master's degree in health research and data, and they were on board. They understand the importance of looking at data to make sure that our outcomes are actually being affected by our activities. However, other program managers in our division still have paper files and really only use paper documentation. So asking them to come up with ways to demonstrate that they are effective required not just a complete shift in their thinking, but also a lot of support in actually going and hand counting files until we could put them into an Excel spreadsheet, and some training for the individuals who had never used Excel before. Additionally, coaching was kind of required because people were not hired to be program managers because they're effective public speakers or because they're comfortable in public speaking. And all of a sudden, we're asking these program managers to go and talk about data, already something they're a little uncomfortable with, to a large group of senior level officials. So needless to say, it created a tremendous amount of anxiety for the staff. And so internally, we tried to provide as much support as possible. And I would say that for the first 6 months on my job, probably about 50% of my time was spent training and coaching and supporting people in this process so that they felt more comfortable when they stood up in front of the performance improvement team to present their report on the data. Finally, practice, practice, practice. So, and don't underestimate the amount of practice that is needed. Typically what we would do prior to the performance improvement presentation for the performance improvement team, so the director and his senior staff, we would hold a mock PIT presentation where the senior administrator for the division was present, as well as other various program managers who had gone through the process. And after the mini PIT or the mock presentation, we critiqued the group, and then I spent probably another 2 or 3 hours coaching them to get ready for their actual presentation in front of senior management. The opportunity to engage staff came at various different times for us and at various different levels. And probably my biggest piece of advice would be to listen to what employees are saying about the process. You might not be able to affect change about the process, so if they're unhappy with the way things have rolled out, but you can validate that what they are feeling is normal, and that that you're there to support them and to help them. So when Jack Moran was here, he talked about how you're going to have allies and resistors, and really that your focus should not be on the resistors, and that was how I had approached things as well when I first got in. However, I had one person who gave me a great piece of advice, and he came to me early on with my job here and said, really the people you want on your side are the opinion leaders. And these people don't necessarily have to have formal leadership, but what you're looking for are people within the division who are respected among their peers and whom their peers turn to when they have questions or they need help. And so in my first 6 months here, I made it my mission to figure out who these opinion leaders were and to consult with them and to figure out how I could use this process to make it beneficial for staff and how I could engage staff in this. And so getting those opinion leaders on my side helped to start to sway the culture and to sway some of the resistors into that allies camp. Another thing that I think a lot of people get upset about is when staff openly complain and criticize the efforts that you're trying to undertake. And it's really hard not to take that personally, especially when your 40 hours a week are devoted to the very things that they're criticizing. I heard things from staff members who said, oh, this is just a passing fad. Once this director is out with the governor, this will be gone, so I really shouldn't incorporate it. To, this is a terrible way to roll this out. I don't understand why you're doing it this way. You're just trying to create more work for us. If you keep changing your mind on what you want, no one's going to listen. To me, in order to be able to do my job well, I needed to be able to reframe that criticism and figure out a way to engage those staff members. So one way to not take it as personally is to view complaints and criticism as saying that the person who's complaining to you trusts you. Because if they didn't trust you, they probably wouldn't say negative things about the director if they thought you were going to run back to him and tattle. It also gives you the opportunity to understand where your audience is at and to understand how you can do your job better. And then finally, it gives you the opportunity to reframe. So if they're coming to you with terrible ideas, not terrible ideas, excuse me, if they're coming to you and telling you where your ideas are bad or wrong, you now have the opportunity to engage them and to say, you know, that's great, maybe I'll take this into consideration and we'll try this for the next go-round. Or you can say, I see what you're saying, but have you thought of it like this? And so it creates a dialogue instead of just a mandate. So within the Wyoming Department of Health, we've seen several changes, which the director, he's a very quiet man, so he doesn't necessarily let you know his plan ahead of time. You just have to kind of go with the flow. But what we found is that the first year HealthStat was implemented at his level is that he was basically just wanting to familiarize the staff with the concept of reporting data. And so basically he said, I want you to come to report to me, but each program manager got to decide what was important and what they would be reporting on. So they picked their measures that they would be reporting on, and they picked how they would define their successes. And it was really about just getting something on paper, just getting program managers in front of this group and talking. Year two, that's where I came on, was focusing on the program's purpose and the outcome measures. And so we saw a real shift around moving from just getting something on the paper to really looking at that mission and saying, does this mission tie to your outcomes? Are you measuring what you say your purpose is? And so we also saw within the division a focus on incorporating it into the workflow. And I had originally left this bullet off, but when I asked one of my peers to proof it, she was like, no, year two is when we started to understand that this really wasn't about being in addition to our job, but rather talking about how we could do our job in a different way to make it more efficient and more effective. And then in year three, which is the year that we are moving into right now, we're focusing on the process So instead of just reporting on our outcomes, we're saying, what are you doing to move the needle to either make your outcomes improve or decline if it's something that you don't want, like a high diabetes rate. And then we're saying, please report on your efficiency. So are you being good stewards of the money that you are given to work with this program? Additionally, we had our first special topics discussion, and this is where we were looking at breaking down silos. And so the director's office did an excellent job of facilitating this, where the Public Health Division came and had all of our programs who touch smoking cessation and smoking prevention present on smoking, but they also had people in the room from the Behavioral Health Division and from Medicaid and from aging so that we could start reaching out and making connections within our department that for so long had not been communicating with each other. So I would have to say that in the year that I've been here, I've seen the number of allies increase by leaps and bounds. We're seeing performance-based contracting. We're seeing performance management used for programmatic decision-making. In fact, one of the program managers came up to me about 2 months ago and said, you know, I know that I would never be able to, or I know that I don't have the opportunity to talk to the director, but if I could tell him that this initiative has made a difference in the way that I manage my program and the way that I think about my granting streams and the activities that we are doing. She was like, I would just like to pass that message along. And I have to tell you that this staff member was one of the staff members who struggled the most with this change when it first came into place. She had never been asked to think in this way. It was very challenging for her, and she was concerned that we were losing sight of taking care of the population that she was tasked with taking care of by focusing on all of this data. So to see her shift has been spectacular. Additionally, one of our other big resistors was a program manager who did not understand the value in this process. And in my first meeting with him, I watched as he, in frustration, pounded on the table because no one understood him. Probably, again, about 2 months ago, he came to me and said, you know, I think I'm going to train my field staff in this because I see how well it's worked for the department in getting our priorities aligned and making sure that we're really doing what we need to be doing. And so moving from having someone who pounds on the table to someone who is now training his own staff without my support, but just going out there and doing it, I think speaks volumes to the shift that we've started to see within our own culture. This isn't to say that all of our resistors are converts, but it's more to say that we've come a really long way in our process in just a very short time frame. So I think the biggest take-home message that I have from this whole talk is that changing the culture surrounding performance management really requires having an approach from 2 levels. So you need that leadership support and mandate to keep it going, but you also need coaches to kind of help your staff understand how they fit and understand how their programs could benefit from this. And so I want to thank you guys for inviting me to talk, and I hope this can help you spur some excellent discussion within the room.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate that. We need to hear more about these challenges that you just shared and how, of course, not everything works for everyone, and you just get up and try again. And thank you for sharing what worked and some of your successes. We'll definitely get to your questions, but I want to turn it over to Dan to talk a little bit about his work in measuring QI culture.
Thank you, Lil. And Jennifer, I appreciate that. That's a good segue. Mine doesn't talk about how to bring about, cultural change, but just measuring the distribution and growth in a culture. Just a little bit about my organization and how it came about. Let me just start with that, just kind of describing the structure here. In Idaho, we do have a decentralized state. There's 7 public health districts, and I do reside in the Bureau of Business Operations. I report to my bureau chief, which is Tracy, and she reports to our division administrator. So it's a really tight-knit group. We have just 213 in our division for our Division of Public Health. But our physical distribution, our structure there, we do have a 4th floor, a 6th floor for most of us, and then our EMS and preparedness, and the lab is physically at another location. So there is that little dislink there for that group of people there. And that makes it a little difficult there when it comes to working on some of our business and dealing with quality and change. Excuse me. Now, how was this quality culture tool created? Well, Tracy does give me crayons to color with, which is great. And last July, the division was preparing a major change. What we were doing was reorganizing, actually physically changing all our offices around, restructuring there. And our management assistant, she had this hard copy, a floor plan of the 4th floor. And I was kind of like, well, I want to see what I've done, the progress. I've been there for about a year and a half, and we were nearing, as everybody knows, our NNPHI grant was coming up on end of September. So I started just taking not really crayons, but some pens that I had, different color pens and highlighters, and started just tracing around the offices. And one of them was just taking a light blue to see who's been to all my QI training. You know, who's been to flowchart training, who's been to the 5 Whys, and fishbone diagram, that kind of thing, just to see what was going on. And so I started laying that out, and like, okay, who's been to all these trainings? And just kind of did a layout there. And then after that, I decided, well, what about the NNPHI projects? So then I took a different color, and I started using this dark blue and seeing all the NNPHI projects. And then we decided, using some of our NNPHI grant money, we purchased Visio software. That way people could use that software for flow charting, which is just excellent. Not trying to market, just it was really good software. It's Microsoft, and it really helps out for people doing the flow charting. So I use that and use red dots. Yes?
This is Lil. Can you review what you mean when you say some of your NNPHI projects for those who may not be so familiar with the initiative?
Oh, I'm sorry, yes. For our grant, that's the NNPHI grant. And we have many projects that we do, quality projects. So we have the contracting project. I'm trying to think of some of the projects that we had here, if I have any listed on hand.
Focusing around performance improvement activities.
Yeah.
And it varies from site to site.
Yeah, we had some lab projects that we were doing. We had the NNPHI, the contracting project. And then we had for the EMS, we had a project that we're doing, seeing that we're a very rural and spread out state. One of the things is that our EMS for certification, we have a real hard time getting a lot of EMS certified, so we have a program that we're trying to get a lot of our rural area certification. So we have a program working with the colleges and getting that program going and doing online training. So we have projects like that going on. And so within those projects, each of them going on with our teams, and so I've just traced as to which staff members are involved in those projects. And that's what's being traced in that floor plan. And you're going to see a layout in just a moment in one of my slides. That's going to come to fruition. So thank you. I appreciate that. Sorry about that. And let's go to the next slide here. So as I was doing that, all of a sudden I realized that I'm starting to see this distribution here of activities. And then if I was to remeasure this in a year, I would see the growth. So Tracy, these crayons are kind of finally paying off, okay? And in the next slide, you're going to see this. Actually, I have 2 slides that are going to do that. So let me just go to that. So here's the one that I first started out with, okay? And let me get this pointer here up. This light blue, that's the first one that I started out with that I was just tracing with all these light blues. These are all the QI training classes that staff were going to, okay? And in the dark blue, those are all the projects. Who's working on a project? That kind of makes sense now, Lil? You're going to be my sounding board
Yeah.
here.
Yeah,
Okay.
that makes sense to me.
Okay. And then the green would be one-on-one training. Someone needs assistance. They couldn't come to the class, or just, hey Dan, I forgot how to do that flow charting. Could you help me? I'm working on a flow chart. Okay, sure. Let's do some one-on-one training. So this is what I was starting to see, like, oh my gosh, I could start seeing this distribution. Who's working on what, on projects, or who's not doing anything, and that's not negative. It's just helped me out real greatly, over the year and a half that I've been there. Who's working on what, who's not. Oh, and the red, that's the Visio. Who's got Visio flowchart software, okay? That's just one. And let's see if I can get to next slide. And this is more familiar for a lot of you. And you can do this also in Visio. You can just create an organizational chart and create these layers, okay? You can also do it where you just show one layer. If you just want to show the projects in dark blue, or just show in light blue who's been to your training if you wanted to create this, for example, and show that to upper management or the project manager in their area, maybe just this area, that kind of thing. Oops, I got to bring up that, just this area. Maybe that project manager wants to see. Okay? So that was really neat. I was just at this point of just, oh my gosh, I've created this tool that I can do this as me, the project manager, let's say, the PIM. I can now see what's going on with all my projects, all the training, and who's got software to be able to do flowcharts. So that was really neat. And then what I did after that was I created an Excel spreadsheet so I could start logging all this information, especially if everybody's going to quality training. Well, if I just had that little light blue around someone's name, I can't list all the different types of training. So I just made up fictitious names. I've got Ricky Bobby here, for example. If they went to flowcharting and Visio training, well, okay, that's great once, but for Jerry Rice, for example, they went to ROA training twice, 2 different types of training, and then if they went to flowcharting and we added a whole bunch of them, well, that would stack up, so that's why I needed to have an Excel spreadsheet, that kind of thing. So that really pays off to have the Excel as an overlay to keep record of what types of training, or if there's multiple projects that someone's working on. And then the big grant question, and that's going back to, for those of you that, I realize the NNPHI grant's going away, but at this time I was working at is, the big question I had was, how do we measure the change in a culture? And that's what this conference call is about. For me, it was 3 questions that I had: growth, distribution, and change. How do we measure growth in a culture? That cultural growth. Also distribution and change. With this chart that I have, the organizational chart, for example, I can start seeing that growth, because if I get a baseline measure, and then a year later, as I keep plotting in, I can then see that before and after. Distribution, well, you saw what was happening there. I can see the distribution. And the change, that's the first question, the growth, before and after. So I've always struggled with that question, and now I have that answer. And just to let you know, this quality culture tool, it is not sliced bread. It's not the answer to everything, okay? It's just something to solve the problem, for me, and seeing it in a different light. And if you find this useful, it's just one tool of many. Just like we have the flow charting, the 5 whys, the fishbone diagram, or anything else, it's just one of many tools, okay? It's also still under development. Now the potential uses for this, like I kind of mentioned a little bit, upper management. It's already proven useful for me. I use it quite a bit now. It gives a big picture. It's a snapshot. I've presented this from time to time and given to them, here's where we're at, folks. Here's what we got going. And they can see, either I can present it by bureau. Some of you may have a division or whatever. We call them bureaus. So I can show it by division or by bureau, and they can see what's going on. They can also have it broken down by program, so they can see who's involved, who's not, or the big picture. For middle management or program managers, they can see who's involved, who's not, who's on projects, who's going to get training, and the staff can also see that. They can see what's going on. For the project manager, the PIM, or the quality manager, I'm not sure how you title yourselves, but I have, as you see in quotes, the project manager. It's a great way to manage your projects, to really see what's going on and get those lessons learned. I had a great example here that happened this year. We were working on a project, and it happened in our BOCAPs. We were going to work on records retention. We were just about to start the project, and I started laying out what was going on. We were going to have our AAs that were going to flowchart in each of their areas how they do their process for records retention. And so I laid out what was going to happen, as to who's going to do the flow charting. And I was just doing the org chart. And what we discovered was, whoops, and let me get this up here. These are the AAs here that have 4 of the 5 have not had flowchart training. Oops. And so I showed it to the lead AA that we got a problem here. They're supposed to flowchart, and they haven't had any flowchart training. So she quickly resolved the problem. Dan, in 2 weeks, you're going to give flowchart training to these 4, so they can then do the first step, which is lay out the flowcharting. So then we can do the next step, which is figure out what's wrong with the processes and then streamline. But it was very helpful. I mean, we did a lessons learned right off the bat. We didn't even realize that 4 of the 5 AAs didn't even know how to flowchart, and we were asking them to do that. So that was just one little simple lesson learned that we got from this. There are a few cautions that we learned from this, and this was really neat. Jack Moran, he just happened to be out giving a leadership training, and I showed him this quality culture tool. He was nice enough to volunteer and help me write an article with this. We teamed up, and we did a little bit of a lessons learned, a cautions. A couple of things I want to share with you. One is the definition of culture. Okay, that one is, it's not the true sense of what you might think culture is. It's just activities. Okay, I don't want you to think of it as the true sense of boundaries or values, beliefs, and that kind of thing. It's just quality improvement activities. Okay, and then also on the second one, define your boundaries. Okay, for me, when I do this, it's just the NNPHI projects. And the reason why you want to define your boundaries is you may have a lot of programs that are doing a lot of quality projects, and you're probably not going to be able to capture all those. Okay, and you're going to have staff that's very offended if you're reporting this to management or reporting it out to everybody, and then they're going, hey, you don't have my projects up there. Okay, and I'm assuming that some of your states have just huge divisions, and that would be a lot to record and keep track of. So maybe just keeping it defined and really pay attention to that and just keep that honed in and just define your boundaries to just what you want to keep it to. Also, you want to make sure you do develop a baseline. Like any quality project, you want to before and after. So get a baseline measure, get that set up, and lay it out kind of like you saw on one of my things. I'll just go back to something like that. That would be a baseline, and then a year later, so you can show the difference. Okay? And don't track too many items when you set up your Excel spreadsheet. This is something Jack and I really looked at and mulled over. If not, you're going to turn into a Keystone Cop. just chasing everything. For what we did was just basically the QI training projects, that kind of thing. Keep it very simple. Keep to the KISS rule. You don't want to do too many things, or you're going to be spending all your time doing that and reporting back. And you really don't want this to be a punitive thing. Okay?
And Dan, what is the KISS?
Keep it simple, stupid. Sorry about that. You just want to keep this real simple. You don't want to be a slave to this project, to your quality culture tool. Thank you on that one. You do want to share your quality culture tool maybe on a quarterly, biannual, or annual basis. And definitely make sure this tool is used in a positive sense. It's not meant to be punitive. I want to emphasize that. It's just something, and it's not your job to marshal. That's up to leadership. You're Sergeant Friday, just reporting the facts. And maybe you can be helpful. I've done that too. When I've looked at the results, and I've gone to a bureau chief, I've kind of set the stage a little bit, like, let's take a look at this. And I see some areas that are gaps, but let's make sure we're looking at this in a positive light, okay? Kind of set the stage a little bit. And it turned out that the reason why some of the AAs weren't going to my classes, they were watching the phones. They were covering. That's why. And I was like, okay. They couldn't go to the class because they had to watch the phones. I said, that's okay. So what if we set up something where maybe, somebody could watch the phones on a day, and I'll put on a special class so then they could go to the classes, and I'll put on a special class. We didn't want to punish, and we wanted to identify what was the root cause. Isn't that what quality is all about? Approaching these in a positive light, not a negative. So we found out what was wrong, and no, it wasn't their fault. They weren't trying to avoid. They just couldn't. Okay? Hope I didn't go through that too fast, but I was trying to keep an eye on the clock too, so I do apologize if I zipped through that a little too quickly. Are there any
you're
questions?
Fine, Dan.
Thank you.
I do have a question from somebody. What baseline were you using to develop these? Can you explain that further?
Thank you. Well, just starting off with my crayons coloring, and the baseline came out was I had a whole bunch of past information, which was every class that I gave, I had a sign-in sheet. So I just pulled out all my sign-in sheets and then started, with the, and let me go back to that slide. Thank you for asking it. That's actually a good one. Can I get to that? No, I have to do this. Sorry. I think I just have to go one by one. There we go.
If you double-click it, you should be able to.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So just with the light blue felt pen, and I was just tracing with who's been to, with those sign-in sheets, and just doing with the light blue, oh, this person's been there, this person's been to a class, and that's what I was doing. And that's what I came up with, and that's when I said, oh my gosh, this is what I've got, and that was just the 4th floor, and then there was the 6th floor, and the labs, and the EMS, and preparedness, and that's how I was realizing, hey, look, I've got distribution. This is the culture. This is how we're changing the culture in our public health division. And that became my baseline. So this year, in August, I'll be able to do a remeasure, and hopefully this will be all filled in.
Exciting. And so you collected all this information through those sign-up sheets? And if
Correct.
You knew that if you were involved in their trainings.
Yeah,
okay.
Everybody signed in.
All right. A couple other questions for you. Dan, you mentioned an article that you wrote with Jack Moran.
Yes. You said double-click?
Yes.
There we go.
There's
There's
the
the
link.
article. It's on the Public Health Foundation, PHF.
Wonderful. Another question. I'm going to hand one to Jennifer. This is more in reference to yours, but how were you able to identify the opinion leaders in areas of the agency with the staff you were unfamiliar with?
That's a great question. So I tend to just go out and talk to people, which probably is not necessarily the answer you want. But what I did when I was talking to people is that I just asked them in casual conversations. I would say I'm new here, and I don't know who to go to when I need help or need to bounce an idea off someone, because there is no performance improvement office here. I am the performance improvement manager, and that's it for our division. And so I just really reached out to everyone I was talking to and said, who do you go to for help? Or who do you go to when you have questions? Or who do you go to bounce ideas off of prior to talking with your boss? And so I kept a running list in my head, not on paper, of who people talked about. And so the names that came up quite frequently, I made sure that I introduced myself to those people and scheduled times to talk with them, meet with them. And a lot of times what came out, at least in this organization, is that the opinion leaders are people who have been with this organization for a long time. And so they have been through and through with the Public Health Division through numerous governor and director changes. And so a lot of people see them as the gatekeepers to historical knowledge and just having a good concept of public health and where the Public Health Division has been and will be going. Does that help?
Smart. Do it through word of mouth. If it doesn't help, let us know. Another question, I think more directed towards Dan. What type of QI process and tool training, including ongoing training, has and do you help to be the QI trainer?
Could you repeat that, please?
Let me see. What type of QI process and tool training, including ongoing training, has and does Dan do to help him be the QI trainer?
If I understand the question, I use an array of training. I mean, there's flowchart training, fishbone diagram, 5 whys, those kinds of things. Tomorrow, for example, I've got a 3-hour training class that I've got with one of the bureaus. And it's going to be on the difference between QA and QI. They're having trouble, and we're finding out that more and more grants are requiring that they do QI activities. And what I'm finding out is that the program managers are stuck where they're doing a lot of QA, and they don't know how to get from QA to QI. So I'm going to be introducing a lot of QI tools, for example, as well as this is what a QA tool is, right? Yeah. Well, here's how you get from that and getting aggregate data and how to use QI tools. Oh, okay. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. And
I think I kind of understood that question a little bit differently, and so I'm just going to kind of chime in and maybe answer it as well, even though I am not the QI expert that Dan is. So what, like I mentioned earlier, we contracted with Jack Moran and the Public Health Foundation to come in and provide us some quality improvement train the trainer training, and we were able to pay for that out of our NNPHI grant. However, I've also have been working on teaching myself to keep myself current with the field of knowledge, and so I rely heavily on some public forums that are out there, specifically PHQUIX, which is spelled PHQUIX.org, and this is a great resource if you haven't looked into it, where you can come online and kind of share your group knowledge and learn different things from different people about QI and what it looks like in practice and just keeping yourself on top of things.
Absolutely. And Dan, what do you do any trainings for yourself to kind of keep up on it, or refreshers or anything?
Well, we have the NNPHI grant conference. Then there's the one in May for the NNPHI We had the Hawaii Symposium that I went to as well last September, and then the Open Forum that was in Memphis that I went to as well. Hopefully this summer to work out a kind of a little agreement between Utah and Idaho where we're going to trade off on training, where Laverne Snow and I, where I do some training down there, and she's going to provide training for me as well. We're going to train each other, so to speak, her program and my program. We're going to share. So we're seeing if we can work something out on that as well.
Do either of you or any others have any suggestions for some of the best advanced trainings for QI coaches?
So with our training, Amanda McCarthy from the West Virginia Public Health Division, and I might be messing up her organization's name, but she came out, and she is also a performance improvement manager, and she said that she taught herself QI just using the textbook written by Jack Moran, and it's called the Public Health Quality Improvement Manual. I think it's over on my bookshelf, so I apologize. And she said that she just read a chapter a week until she understood the concepts.
I've got that book too. It's very good.
Great. Another question to both of you. Did you find that the folks that were in the agency the longest that were also there, those that would say this was just the flavor of the month? Were those kind of the same people?
I think I was expecting that, but I was surprised to find that those were split between the groups, for at least in our organization. It really just depends on the person's willingness to kind of embrace change and the person's flexibility in thinking.
Not necessarily. And Dan, how about you? Did you find that those who were there the longest were kind of the ones who are thinking, oh, this will pass?
You know, it's the strangest thing here, and I've worked for quite a bit of organizations and companies. This is the most on-board organization. When I came on, people are like, well, we're going to do this. Okay, let's do it. And I was like, what? And I kept, talking to Tracy, like, when is this going to happen? I felt like Charlie Brown and Lucy with the football kept waiting for the football to be pulled out, and it still hasn't happened. We really haven't had the resistance for people wanting to take on projects and that resistance. So you're talking to the wrong person, unfortunately. I'm still waiting to have that happen, which is really, really strange because I've had organizations that the complete opposite, that resistance can be just, it's frustrating and aggravating. Mm-hmm. And I understand that when people have that. I know people that are going through that. Sorry, I wish I could give you an example.
Yeah. Next question, Dan, this is towards you. Are your brown bag sessions required or are they voluntary attendance?
All volunteer. So it can be of any sort.
Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How do you advertise or get people to come?
If they don't show up, I threaten to tell everybody I'm best friends with them. That usually gets people to show up. Actually, I just put out an announcement division-wide at the beginning of the month that it will be on a certain day, usually around the end of the month. Also, Tracy will announce at the management team meeting, which is our bureau chiefs, so that they can also pass it along. And it just depends. Sometimes it's a big group, sometimes it's not. And then also, we've also tried out a little bit focusing different this year is training by bureaus as well. We want to see how that works because with bureaus, there's a lot of projects and teams and things like that. We want to focus on breaking down silos. So maybe there's two programs that have similarities. So we thought that might be an interesting approach. We just want to try something different. So I'm doing that as well in addition to bag lunch, like this QA versus QI training. I always want to, see what's happening. And so we're going to see if this has an effect as well. Just something different.
How many people typically attend?
We can have anywhere from 10 to 30 people to a class.
Mm-hmm. And it's focused on discussion and interactive kind of learning?
Always, yes. I always keep it open-ended. Anybody can chime in or raise their hand when I do the presentations or discussions, yes.
Great. Well, that's about all we have time for today, but I want to thank everyone so much for your great questions, and especially big thanks to Jennifer Gray and Dan Ward. You always provide something new and insightful, so thanks for sharing. And if anyone has any questions for follow-up, please let me know. My email is ljohnson@nnphi.org, and we'll be in touch. This recording will be sent to you all within the next couple of weeks. Thank you all. Really appreciate it.